What is emotional safety? What does it feel like? And why are so many of us utterly terrified of this? You'd think that emotional safety would feel comforting, like a soft place to land. But for a lot of us, it doesn't. It feels suspicious, unfamiliar, even threatening. And if you've lived through trauma, chaos, or emotional instability growing up, your lens of what emotional safety is can be grossly warped. Up is down is up, and our emotions are or can be in complete chaos. If this sounds familiar, this episode might explain why. This is the Reconnection Co, where healing starts with self-connection. Now, I'm a healthcare professional with over 18 years of experience supporting wonderfully complex humans across a wide range of health concerns. I'm now deepening that work by undertaking accredited studies in mental health and counselling, with a focus on trauma, relationships, and emotional healing. Whilst none of the content I share is designed to replace individual mental health advice or therapy, this space is here to help you feel seen, safe, heard, and validated. If you're ready to reconnect with yourself, I invite you to follow, subscribe, like, and engage. You are very welcome here. So in this episode, what we're going to explore is what emotional safety actually is, beyond the buzzwords, why many trauma survivors find it uncomfortable or unfamiliar, how emotional safety can be subtly eroded throughout our lives, and then what emotional safety actually feels like. And this is if you've had it versus if you haven't. And then how we can start building real grounded emotional safety today. And if you would like some free guidance on how you can try and help integrate everything we're exploring today, over on the Reconnection Co YouTube channel, I do have a guided journaling playlist available for you, where essentially these are guided journaling questions to help you explore many of the elements that we discuss in various episodes, guide you through it, and again, help you integrate this into your daily existence. If emotional safety is confusing for you, you're not alone. Many of us who grew up with various manifestations of dysfunctions that exist, much of which align with our ACE scores, also known as our adverse childhood event scores, or even experienced trauma later in life, may have never known or may have even forgotten what emotional safety actually feels like. In fact, if we've lived through years of relational instability or unpredictability, when we're then faced with or in dynamics that have a distinct absence of chaos, it can feel unsettling or even unsafe, or at the very least, suspicious. Now, to understand why emotional safety is a bare essential to function in life, let alone thriving in life, I'm going to touch on some higher level things for a brief minute, so stick with me. And this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I know it might seem a little bit higher level, but stick with me because I think it will be very helpful for you understanding where you may be sitting in some element of emotional chaos, if you are. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a psychological theory that was proposed by Abraham Maslow in 1943, and it outlines a 5-tier model of human needs, often illustrated as a pyramid. And the idea is that basic needs must be met before individuals can focus on higher level psychological or self-fulfillment needs. So if you're someone with a history of trauma, constantly feeling like you're doing all that you can do to survive when those around you are thriving, this hierarchy can really clearly illustrate and help you understand why you feel like you're sinking whilst other people are soaring. Now, I will dive into this a bit more later on in the episode, but I think it can be really beneficial for those of us who fall into the comparison trap, especially as we creep further into adulthood, when, again, some of us are surviving, others are thriving. Now, a quick overview of the hierarchy. Again, picture a pyramid. On the bottom, we have our physiological needs, the most basic survival needs. If they aren't met, nothing else matters. Food, water, shelter, breathing, clothing, sleep. If you're stuck here, you are in survival mode at its very most, and you do not have the resources, capacity, or ability to prioritize emotional, relational, or intellectual needs. Then tier 2, this is our safety needs, and this includes both physical and emotional safety, and where we're focusing today. And the reason emotional safety sits at the second tier, right above our basic survival needs, is because it's essential. We are creatures of connection, we are emotional beings. So the elements that comprise this tier of safety, we have physical safety, so being safe from physical and sexual violence, safe from natural disasters. Then financial security, income, housing stability, health and well-being, and emotional safety with those around us, predictability, trust, routine, absence of emotional threat. This is where our emotional safety fits in, because without it, we're hard pressed to feel psychologically stable enough to form secure relationships or explore our identity further. And this is why it's often said, and it is entirely true, that the close relationships we have a huge impact on our life, on our work, on our happiness, our ability to succeed across all of these elements. Because all of these elements are found in the next upper tiers, and you can't thrive further up the pyramid when you're sitting on a very shaky foundation. So if you think about it, if you're in survival mode, be it physiological survival or emotional survival, our nervous system can't fully access all of the other elements, and it doesn't have the capacity to help build our self-esteem. It doesn't have the capacity and the bandwidth for us to flow into creativity or develop more meaningful connections because we're too busy staying on guard. Now, the second tier does bleed into tier 3, and this is where we're at now. And this is regarding love and belonging. So theoretically, once the body feels safe, we seek connection, which is why I say the previous tier and this tier bleed into one another, as seeking emotional safety from the previous tier can drive the motivations or motivators and behaviors in this middle tier, where we see intimate relationships, friendships, community and belonging, family, which could be our biological or chosen family, our needs for having these safe relationships and exploring these further. This is where it comes into play. So theoretically, according to this model, at this stage, people desire acceptance, love, and connection. But without safety in place, like the previous tier, relationships here can become enmeshed, codependent, or volatile, especially for trauma survivors. So, as I mentioned before, I'm not going to dive too far down this rabbit hole, as there's a few episodes worthy of exploring all of these elements on their own. So, a quick wrap up of the last two tiers. Coming in at the fourth tier, this is our esteem needs, self-worth, confidence, self-respect, feeling valued. And then our top tier, the unicorn, is self-actualization. This is essentially about reaching your fullest potential once the foundations have been built below you. Personal growth, creativity, purpose, autonomy, fulfillment. Now, for those of you who have been in unhealthy relationship dynamics as children or even as adults, you can probably start to see how a rocky foundation of the more essential tiers can sabotage the ability to even have a semblance of hope of thriving in these upper tiers, which is where I throw a lot of criticism that much of the reductionist information out there on the internet about breakups and getting your ex back, where a lot of it is saying shit just like, oh, just become high value. Great, but if I'm in survival mode with some of the bare fucking essentials of my existence and I don't have the tools, resources, capacity or understanding to stabilize where I'm at, I'm not exactly going to become this untouchable high value unicorn that I'm led to believe by these Muppets that I should be to get my ex back or to attract the perfect relationship. We need to start where we're at, and this is where that reconnection to self and acceptance of self becomes very important. Now, I must preface this with the nuance that you certainly can be improving multiple facets across all areas of this hierarchy. So, for example, just because your finances are a little bit shaky does not mean that you're not connecting with great people and potentially improving your job status or achieving levels of personal growth. It's just to highlight that you may not be able to thrive at the top when some of the more essential foundations are in shambles. Apologies for my little side quest. Tell me you're an ADHDer without telling me you're an ADHDer. Example A. Though, if you would like me to explore this topic in more depth, I would 100% love you to do this, be it in relation to relationships or in relation to your working dynamics and situations, because it is a topic I find immensely fascinating, and I am about 14,000 words into an actual book I'm writing on this, so any excuse to dive down these rabbit holes I welcome, but I digress. Let's get back on track to emotional safety. So essentially, when safety isn't modelled consistently in childhood, or it has been eroded over time in our adult experiences, Either way, these experiences shape how our adult nervous system responds to emotional safety. Often it won't trust calm, it often will be waiting for the threat to pop up. And this is the real kicker if we have a history of trauma. Often what it does trust is the actual threat. So before we get too far into this, what is emotional safety? Let's define it. So emotional safety, in the broad sense, being accepted as you are without needing to perform or shrink. Knowing that your needs won't be weaponized against you. That means your vulnerability won't be used against you later as ammunition, mockery, or leverage. It's trusting that conflict doesn't lead to punishment or abandonment. So if you grew up being met with silence, yelling, emotional withdrawal, or gaslighting when conflict arose, you likely learned to either overfunction, shut down, or fawn. And then another element of emotional safety is being able to co-regulate with someone, not codependently rely on someone else to regulate you, but to be soothed with them. So co-regulation, I can hold myself and I can let you hold me too, and I can do the same for you. Co-regulation is the healthy mutual regulation of nervous systems between two people. It's how humans are biologically wired to connect and feel safe. In emotionally safe relationships, we help each other feel calm, seen, and stable without losing ourselves in the process. So what it looks like. A friend listens and helps you settle when you're overwhelmed, not by fixing, but being present. A partner offers support during your anxiety spiral, but doesn't take responsibility for it and doesn't punish you for it. You feel grounded by someone's calm energy, even when you're struggling internally. But you're also able to do the same for them. So in the psychological context, these elements are sort of grounded or based on polyvagal theory and attachment theory. And in order for us to healthily co-regulate, we tend to need to have healthy boundaries and a pretty solid sense of self. And it does involve emotional attunement, not emotional fusion. And at its baseline, it essentially allows authenticity, nervous system stability, intimacy, and healthy repair after rupture. So that is the unicorn that even if you have a history of trauma, you can certainly achieve this, but we will dive into that again at a later date. We've got years worth of content that we can explore. Now, in contrast, codependency. I can't be okay unless you are, and I need you to regulate me or I fall apart. God, this was my ex to a T. So the definition of codependency essentially is an unhealthy pattern of emotional enmeshment where one or both people over-rely on the other for stability, identity, or self-worth. And it often comes from unresolved trauma, poor boundaries, and a lack of emotional autonomy, and very much a lack of emotional maturity. So those with arrested development, they very much can become the very heavy-handed codependents. So often what it will look like is the codependent person will feel responsible for someone else's emotions or behavior, or expect them to rescue you from your own. You'll often lose your identity in relationships, molding yourself to keep the peace. God, yep, I have been guilty of doing this, so I have also been codependent. Another example is if the other person is upset, you panic. If they're happy, you feel safe. Your emotional state is essentially fused to theirs, and your emotional state is in flux as theirs is in flux. You kind of follow the leader in that respect. So in a psychological context, this is common in survivors of childhood trauma, neglect, addiction, or very inconsistent parenting. And it's linked pretty heavily to the fawn responses, anxious attachment and low self-trust. And it's not just anxious attachment. Our fearful avoidance can have this happening as well. So that's where they do have those anxious traits, but also those sort of dismissive tendencies as well. And when there's codependency, this is where you'll often mistake love or care for just someone having a little bit of interest in you and that enmeshment. So basically, codependency is mistaken for love or care, but it essentially lacks the healthy reciprocity and boundaries that are required for it to be healthy. And then we have the upper tier, which is where it can be codependency on steroids. So it's dysregulation, where my nervous system is overwhelmed and I cannot return to balance. So often those that are leaning pretty heavily into their attachment styles, especially our fearful avoidance, This dysregulation is often where someone's nervous system becomes stuck in a stress response: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and it can't settle back into a regulated state unless they maybe have someone who they are codependently sucking dry to try and regulate them for themselves. It's not inherently bad, it's a survival mechanism, but chronic dysregulation impacts your health, very much impacts your relationships, and it very much railroads your ability or the ability of those around you to feel emotionally safe. So when someone's dysregulated, it'll often look like they are emotionally overwhelmed or flooded. So in response, they can shut down or become really reactive, and they can even just not be able to think clearly. So people will talk about the fearful, avoid, and entering the freeze response. It's literally where they are dysregulated to high heaven and they just cannot cope and they just shut down, they freeze. So after they've entered that freeze response, they may feel overly anxious or overly numb and just detach for long periods. So that's often why after a breakup, your dismissive or your fearful avoidant might look like they just do not care because they are just detached and shut down. And then another thing that is more of a subtle hint that someone's dysregulated is you can't come down when nothing's wrong. And you can't put your finger on why you feel off. Like, there's nothing I should be panicking about, but internally I'm panicking. What's going on? So the dysregulation, which is sort of the upper tier of things not being psychologically and emotionally sound, it is very common in people with CPTSD and high ACE scores, or an insecure attachment style, like our anxious attachers, our disorganized or fearful avoidance, which, oh God, I spent years being dysregulated. And then I spent years in therapy to learn how to regulate myself. So basically, a dysregulated nervous system is very much tied to nervous system sensitivity, trauma histories, or unresolved emotional stress. And healing very much requires tools for self-regulation and safe co-regulation, not an over-reliance on others. It does take psychological and therapeutic intervention. I've never come across anyone that has been able to work their way out of a dysregulated state, especially with those sort of chronic trauma histories and complex trauma histories. You need support to do this, and you need time and you need patience. It's not a quick fix. So that's another thing. If you have an avoidant ex who may have abruptly discarded you, and then they've shut down, and then all of a sudden they've moved on and they appear like they are all happy, fine, and living this dream relationship with the person that they met 2 months after they ended things with you, they haven't changed, because you can't heal this dysregulated state if you're not doing the work, for one, but it takes a lot longer than 2 months. And if they're driving themselves through life on this sort of dopamine and oxytocin high to mask the dysregulation that's bubbling away underneath, they haven't changed. It will come crashing down at some point, when, who knows, but it's not your problem. So now we know what emotional safety may look like when it has or hasn't been present in our relationship dynamics. Where and how does emotional safety get eroded? So let's break this down into some everyday examples. So as children, it can be eroded by being ignored or told to stop crying, being punished for expressing anger, sadness, or fear, or invalidated for something that should have seemed positive. So for me, I am a little bit of a nerd, and I remember coming home after getting the test results, and I would have been in year 7 or 8, where all of the year participated in the test, and I think I came second with about 90%. I was over the moon. Coming second out of over 120 students, for me, I thought that was amazing. And it was 90%. And when I came home and told my mum, her only response was, oh, where's the other 10%? Holy shit. The deflation I felt at that, I felt so small and so invalidated. And it was like, I can't do anything to make you happy. So it's invalidation is real. And gosh, this is more than 20 years later. I still remember that statement. I still remember the interaction. I still remember that feeling. So little jibes like that times that over years and years, it sticks, it has an impact. And then other elements or other ways it can be eroded when we're children is like having to stay small or agreeable to avoid conflict, or like it might be things like, oh shit, mum's home, quick, we've got to clean, we've got to tidy the house, we've just got to make sure nothing's out of place, we've got to be quiet, we've got to be small and just we'll go to our room so we don't set her off. So it's just that walking on eggshells. And then other things that are like maybe less overt, it's even just being rewarded for being easy, quiet, or no trouble. That whole children should be seen and not heard, and don't express any of your emotions towards me. So it's not all extreme over the top ends of the spectrum that we see. It is a spectrum. So it can be a very low grade erasure or erosion, and then it might lead to just having a smaller degree of disorganized or unhealthy relationships with emotional safety as we get older. Now, as adults, it can be eroded when a similar thing, but like when conflict is met with stonewalling, silent treatment, or blame. Now, conflict doesn't have to be what we typically picture as conflict. It's not yelling, fighting. It can be something as simple as stating a need or a boundary, like, babe, I felt really upset or invalidated when you did X, Y, Z. And then again, it might be met with stonewalling, silent treatment, or blame, or just you being completely gaslit as a response. Other things, it might be you ending up feeling like you're too much for needing clarity or comfort. And oftentimes this feeling of too much, a lot of the time for people, it's when you're asking for the bare fucking minimum and this person just doesn't have the capacity to give you that. But instead of them owning, oh, I can't meet your need, you are made to feel like you are too much because you have this need. And other examples is it might just be you sharing something vulnerable and it gets dismissed, it gets minimized, or it can even be used against you. And each and every time something like this happens, your nervous system logs the same message. It's safer to not need anything. Now, these repeated ruptures essentially can shape our attachment style. Yes, it is very much more common for these to develop as we're children. But in your adult life or early adult life, if you are exposed to these environments for quite a prolonged period of time, you can have some attachment wounds develop. But when we're looking at attachment theory, if you go back and listen to a few of the earlier episodes, especially episode 1 of the Reconnection Co podcast, we do explore the history of attachment styles and attachment theory. It's mostly modeled when we are children, but it can be exacerbated or altered when we are a little bit older as well. So essentially, the repeated ruptures can shape our attachment style. Anxious, they typically fear being left, so these people tend to overfunction to try and stay connection or build connection. Avoidance will often fear dependence, so they minimize their needs. So this is often off the back of your needs weren't met, you had to learn to be self-sufficient, very much out of sequence at an age where you still needed caregivers, but you're essentially left to your own devices. And then the fearful avoidant, this is where the combination of the two existed. So you were probably quite heavily dismissed for having needs, and then also there was this sort of hot, cold, push-pull and really inconsistent love and affection that you may have been given. So essentially this leaves the fearful avoidance as people who crave closeness but don't trust it. So this is where those push-pull dynamics really come into play, and they play out in their adult relationships, which I can speak of as being a fearful avoidant. And then now that I am mostly on the other side of this through a shitload of therapy and healing, being more secure, you can identify if you're getting involved with a fearful avoidant, because the hot, cold, push-pull dynamics definitely come into play. Also, to some extent with the dismissive avoidance as well, but fearful avoidance are the ones where you really see it shine. So what does emotional safety feel like with and without a history of trauma? So quickly recapping what emotional safety is. Being accepted as you are, knowing your needs won't be weaponized, trusting that conflict won't automatically lead to punishment or abandon, and being able to co-regulate. So for someone without a trauma history, the calmness is comforting, the consistency is grounding, direct communication builds trust, Love feels mutual, reciprocal, and secure. Now, for someone with a trauma history, calm can feel suspicious. Kindness can often feel fake, like there's an ulterior motive. Direct communication feels utterly anxiety-inducing, intrusive, or threatening. And consistency can feel boring or emotionally flat. So early in dating, this can be where we don't feel the spark, which, yes, it can be because the spark isn't actually there. But if there's a swathe of people in your dating wake who were seemingly very compatible early on, then it just felt wrong. Ding ding, this might be your trauma talking. So emotional safety doesn't feel safe when your nervous system has only known variations of chaos. It feels suspicious, your body doesn't trust it because it hasn't learned how to trust it. So let's throw an example at you. You meet someone kind, consistent, and communicative. They show up, follow through, and don't create drama. If you haven't been traumatized, you feel seen, relaxed, hopeful. This is a potential dating partner that I may want to pursue. However, if you have a history of trauma, this secure unicorn can have you feeling flat, maybe even bored. You might interpret their calm as disinterest. There's no hot and cold. There's no mixed signals or mixed messages for your anxious brain to interpret. There's no need for you to seek validation and approval from them. They're into you. They're accepting you as you are. You're not having to exert ridiculous levels of mental and emotional energy to win their affection. They're just present and are letting things grow. This is why many trauma survivors gravitate towards unpredictable, emotionally intense dynamics where they feel like home. But sometimes, because their home was chaos, this is why the chaos of this new dynamic feels like home. So yes, we've gone over this a little bit, but let's just circle back and have a little bit of a deeper focus on how trauma warps our sense of safety. In unsafe early relationships, you may have learnt to hyper-read everyone's mood, anticipate and manage others' emotional needs, abandon your own needs to keep the peace, confuse emotional labour with connection. So over time, it creates an emotional template. If someone withdraws, you chase. If someone is volatile, you fawn. If someone is safe, you test them or retreat. You might call this person the one when really they're just recreating a dynamic your body recognizes, something that's unpredictable, inconsistent, and emotionally consuming. And unfortunately, those of us that have had a history of trauma, oftentimes we have to go through a number of these emotional dynamics before we recognize the pattern and go, oh shit, why do I keep falling into these horrible dating traps? There is a lot of work to do. So whilst again, this is not designed to replace or be interpreted as mental health care advice, this is a little bit of my insights from some of my studies, but very much a lot of my lived experiences. How can we identify and try and build real emotional safety? You don't need to go back and reparent your parents because good frickin' luck, but you can stop unconsciously trying to relive your trauma story with new people. That's what we mean by unfinished business, chasing the apology, chasing the resolution, or chasing the safety you never received from people who are not capable of giving it. So let's change it. How can we identify emotional safety? Identify if there is consistency over intensity. Do their actions match their words over time, not just when you're upset? If they only show up with intensity but not consistency, that is not safety. That is a pattern and it is a red flag. Did I fall for that with my last relationship? Yes, I did. Okay, another way we can identify emotional safety: freedom to express. Can you say no without punishment? Can you uphold or try and enforce a boundary without there being retribution? So punishment or retribution can look like guilt tripping, shutdown, pouting, stonewalling, or sarcasm, or even just ghosting. So again, I'm ticking off everything on the bingo card here. I was not free to express some very basic, healthy boundaries in my previous relationship. And God, this is why hope keeps us stuck, right? You cannot date potential. Okay, so another way to identify emotional safety. How does the repair look like, and even does it exist? So Does this person acknowledge ruptures in the connection? Do they take accountability, and do they work with you towards resolution? So if every conflict ends with silence or blame, that's not repair, that's control. So if they say, maybe, I'm sorry that you were upset, but I am not sorry for my actions, and there's no insight or accountability on how their actions contributed to the rupture, and they're not acknowledging that during the repair, it's not repair. And then another way is regulation versus activation. And this is the one that is very, very, very hard to identify if you do have a pretty chronic history of trauma. So do they ground you or destabilize you? If their inconsistency feels like home, you need to ask yourself, was your home when you were a child or when you were younger, was your home life calm or chaotic? So if you are with someone who they are consistently calm, you are free to express yourself and your boundaries, they repair ruptures in a healthy way, and you feel grounded and it's consistent, that is green flag, green flag, green flag. However, if they feel like home and in some way you feel regulated, but they also activate you, so with this push-pull dynamic, so they pull away, you feel activated, you chase, you fawn, you try and repair things. And then when they throw a breadcrumb back at you, when they come back, and it may be an apology, but remember, apology without accountability, words without actions don't mean anything. So if they come back and give you a little bit of attention, and then you feel regulated and they feel like home, this is that little red flag that those of us with a history of trauma can find it really freaking hard to identify. So this is why even journaling can help very much, and where a lot of the guided journaling videos that I'm going to put up on the playlist that accompany this episode in particular are going to help you work through. So identifying regulation versus activation. And then lastly is even just having a choice. Do you feel like you have a choice in the relationship, or is it unilateral? Is this other person, are they dictating the pace? Are they dictating the labels? Are they literally dictating everything? Is their emotional state dictating what's happening? And you're there just as the sideshow. So if you don't feel like you have a choice, so you don't feel like you can say no, you don't feel like you can have input into the pace of the relationship, slow things down, speed things up, you don't feel like you can take space without a fear of loss or essentially punishment, again, that's a red flag. So this is, again, where I want to focus a little bit of our accompanying guided journaling videos on, because I think it will really help you identify if and when you might be falling into these emotional safety traps. Now, I'm just going to rattle off before we round out with a couple of essentially just dot points, more or less, on how we can try and build emotional safety. Now, remember, there is the guided journaling playlist that will be over on the YouTube channel that this will accompany this episode. But then I'm also going to do another episode that explores the how to build emotional safety elements a little bit more in depth, because I'm aware of this is turning into a slightly longer episode than I originally intended. And I think the how to build emotional safety, I don't want to just glaze over with a few dot points, because there are nuanced elements to it. But for rounding out this episode, we are just going to dot point it. So some of the elements that are required for us to reconnect with ourselves, reflect, and begin to build emotional safety, it's often naming emotions in safe spaces. So this can be done via journaling or even discussions with trusted people like your therapist or close friends who are safe. And why this matters is because when you name emotions without fear of judgment or rejection, your nervous system begins to believe that your inner experience is valid and survivable. Now, the next one is just tracking your body. This one I'm very much across, and I think it helps hugely because a lot of the time we can be mentally and emotionally disconnected from our physical selves. So tuning into your nervous system's cues, the body 100% remembers what the brain forgets. And there's that whole book on it, The Body Keeps the Score. So this matters because your body will often know that you're unsafe before your thoughts and emotions catch up. So learning to track physical cues can often help you break cycles before they escalate. And this also ties in to the point before where naming emotions in safe spaces. So if you're able to reflect, track how your body is responding, link it to the emotions, and then link it to the environments that you're in, that's where you can start to identify those patterns. And it takes a little bit of time. Yes, journaling. It's not for everyone. I find it immensely helpful. But anyway, so on to the next couple of dot points we're rattling through. So like I mentioned in previous episodes, where we can practice our boundaries with baby boundaries, we can also, when it comes to building emotional safety, is take low emotional risks. So practicing expressing just your truth or a boundary in very low stakes moments. So this builds self-trust and interpersonal safety. So why it matters is because when the stakes are low, the nervous system is more open to rewiring because you've got less of this protective barrier up. So these moments teach you that you can speak your truth and survive the response. So this is very much the baby boundaries I was talking about in the previous episode. And then another thing that is, oh God, I'm laughing because it's, God, how I functioned for freaking decades. So staying when it's calm. Many trauma survivors, we will often equate calm with boredom, with a threat, with disconnect. Don't run, stay and observe. So calm is actually where healing begins. But if your nervous system is used to chaos, you're used to just pulling the rug out and running away, you're going to just continually to subconsciously seek it. So you are just going from band-aid to band-aid to band-aid. You're not actually staying in the calm and learning that it's familiar, that it's safe. And then reparenting yourself. Give yourself what your caregivers didn't, consistently, patiently, and with compassion. Because your inner child isn't asking you to fix the past, they're asking you to show up differently now. And as you can see from these points that I've just gone through, there is so much nuance to all of this. And that's why I don't want to glaze over these and just leave it at that. I will devote a whole nother episode on this to explore a lot more in depth, because it's so incredibly healing, or it can be so incredibly healing when we are putting these elements into practice. So that's not to round out the couple of points. So there's a few more that we'll go through. So we need to learn internal validation, trusting our feelings, trusting our needs, and trusting our truth, even if no one around us does. And those with a history of trauma, many people, they didn't. So why it matters is because when we stop outsourcing our reality and our emotional state to others, we can stop abandoning ourselves. Emotional safety starts within. And this is why it is so freaking hard and takes so much time for us to learn, because inner work is not a quick fix. As much as we would like it to be, it is not. And then building self-trust. So every time that you keep a promise to yourself, every time you honor a boundary, every time you speak up when you are not comfortable with something, when you do not want to do something, you are proving to yourself that you are safe to depend on. Because self-trust is the antidote to codependency and shame. It says, I can hold me now. So wrapping up, emotional safety is not a luxury, unfortunately. It is foundational. And if you didn't grow up with it, you'll likely have to learn it and rewire your nervous system to receive it. Don't mistake stillness for emptiness. Don't confuse chaos with passion. And above all, don't keep calling emotional breadcrumbs a feast. Now, if this episode resonated with you, please subscribe, leave a review or leave a comment, and share it with someone else who may need it. And if you're ready to explore your relationship with emotional safety and yourself on a deeper level, I've created a gentle, trauma-informed guided journaling session over on my YouTube channel. It's under the guided journaling for reconnection playlists on the Reconnection Co YouTube channel. So I look forward to seeing you there. You 100% deserve to feel safe. So let's build that together.